Does anybody remember anything that was said last week?
I remember you talking about Atma.
Atma, yes, and Anathma.
And
And the definition of Atma and Anatma was, in that case?
Awareness. Awareness.
Atma is, ultimately we saw that it was awareness, but when we talked about it initially as Atma and Anatma, it was basically the I and the not I.
Yeah.
And then we went through this argument, do you recall? The logic.
we're all objects.
That's right, that we're all objects. Do you recall that when...
But the sense is if you can perceive with your senses, then it's an object.
That's right.
We are objects, our body.
Our body is objects, and so we perceive with our senses, and we talked about different types of perception. And whenever we perceive something, then we are the perceiver, and the object is that which is perceived, and we're using a method of knowing in order to come to perceive that object. So if it is an object, if it is come to be known by some means of knowledge, then that object cannot be me. We said there was only one exception that we don't need a means of knowing to know about, and that was? It was ourselves. So when you ask the question, do I exist? You say, what means do you come to that conclusion? And there is no means of knowledge, you just know it for fact. So that's the only thing that you know for certain. So it's said that we are self-evident, self-existent, all right? Everything else needs to prove its existence to us. We're the only thing that don't need to prove existence to ourselves, right? And therefore, when things need to be proven from the outside, they are suspect to doubt. As we become more and more knowledgeable, then things that we always knew about as being certain suddenly become more doubtful. And the example was, the sun rises in the east, sets in the west, there are diamonds in the sky that are twinkling, all these things that the sky is blue, all these things that we may have believed at one time in history or in our childhood comes to be known as other things. So whenever we look at any object, we need to realize that we need to keep our minds open because it is subject to doubt. The only thing that is not subject to any doubt is the fact that I exist. And therefore that can become the starting point of all knowledge. And then we extended that and said, well, if I know that I'm Atma and everything other than me is Anatma, and you know that you're Atma and everything other than you is Anatma, then you are Anatma to me and I am Anatma to you. Doesn't seem that very illogical that what I consider to be Atma, you consider to be Anatma, and what I consider to be Anatma, you consider to be Atma. And so we went through this gradual argument to say that Atma is this consciousness, and what you are perceiving when you see me is not Atma. You're seeing the body, the mind. You're seeing my mind through the effect that it has. The mind is intangible, so we cannot perceive it directly. All we can do is perceive it through the emotions or words or anything else that can come out of it, the thinking process that comes out of it. That's why the mind is called the subtle body, because it's imperceptible to our senses. So we have the physical body of everything that we can touch and feel, and then we have the subtle body of the mind, all right? We know that the mind exists. We know there is such a thing as an intangible, imperceptible, subtle body because we know our thoughts, all right? We don't need scientific proof to say there is no subtle body because we know that we have thoughts, and those thoughts don't have a tangible fixed nature. You can't grab hold of it and see what it tastes like, right? It's intangible. So, roughly what we said yesterday, that effectively there is only one Atma, all right? And that Atma is us all. So it's not that Atma is within us, but we're within Atma. And that therefore makes us all one. What we have in these bodies and minds is a manifestation of that is different. So an argument will come later, and we'll tackle it subsequently. Things like, well, how come if we're all the same Atma, how come I can't see what you're thinking? Right? There's clearly a separation. There's you and me, all right? If we're all this one great Atma, then how come I can't feel what you're feeling right now? And that is an argument that naturally comes to mind. Vedanta is always a series. Once you give an explanation, it raises questions, all right? And it's the questions that allows you to go into the next part of it. And we'll deal with things like that later in subsequent classes, okay? So we also said from the first week that the way to learn is Shravana, Manana, Nididhyasana. These are the Sanskrit words for, first of all, listen intently so that you can actually paraphrase it back and listen without opinion. When you listen with opinion, you are qualifying what you hear with what you already know, and therefore you will exclude new things coming to you. But don't take it as gospel, don't take it as belief, just understand what is being said, because your next stage is then to perform the analysis, to do the Q&A, so that there is no doubt left in the material. You understand it fully. And when you understand what has been said and what it means fully, and there is no doubt, you can go into the third stage of contemplation to ask yourself, is this my truth? You don't have to convince anybody else, right? Because this is all about self-knowledge. It's about the knowledge of your own self, nothing else. And therefore, if you believe, it doesn't matter, because this is not a matter of belief. It's when you come to know this for your truth, then you're starting down the path of this spiritual progress. Okay? All right. It's actually, the subject is extremely simple, because the message is extremely simple. There's only one thing. Advaita Vedanta says there is not two. There's only one thing, and that thing is everything. Ourselves, the world, and everything. It's a very simple message, but because it runs counter to all of our experiences, it is so very, very difficult to believe. You grow up your entire life thinking that the sky is blue, and somebody tells you that the sky is not blue. It takes a long time. Now that's about an object. When it comes about yourself and the world, you're absolutely convinced, at the good old age that you are, that everything you know about yourself to be true. All right? And Advaita Vedanta comes along and says, let me show you an alternative view that may challenge that presumption. Okay. So, one of the many people who casually study Advaita Vedanta come up with a phrase often, and this is a mistranslation, that somehow that the world is an illusion. Hello, Rupan. Do come in. Do come and join us, and you can sit either side. Very good timing. We've just had a review of last week, and we were just about to go into this week's subject. So many people who casually study Advaita Vedanta say that the world is an illusion. All of this is a mere illusion. It's a magic trick, right? You are Atma, you are Brahman. There's only one thing, and therefore they can't be all of this around you. But you're sitting on a chair. The chair is supporting you. It hasn't fallen through. You haven't gone down to the floor. There's a table in front of you. You can knock on it. It's pretty solid. Trying to tell somebody that this is all an illusion becomes a very tricky exercise unless you start to explain it. And Vedanta says that the world is not an illusion, is tangible, is material, is useful, is transactional, all right? Is just not real. And in Vedantic terms, reality is defined as that which permanently exists in all three periods of time, in the past, the present, and the future. Only things that exist in all periods of time are considered to be real. Everything else is considered to be transient, comes into being and goes away. Now, a transient thing, therefore, has to be qualified by saying, yes, it's here now, and we're enjoying it, and it's transactional, I can interface with it, but it wasn't always here, and won't always be here. So when you describe anything that is transient, you have to qualify it in time or space. And Vedanta says that anything that you have to qualify isn't really real. Reality never changes, right? And the way that the Upanishads tackle this very subject of reality is through the cause and effect. Do you remember the song by Julie Andrews in Sound of Music? It says, nothing comes from nothing, nothing ever could. That comes from the Upanishads. So the Upanishads believe that there is a cause for everything. You cannot have a case from nothing comes from nothing, all right? If something is there, then it must come from something. It talks about the cause and effect relationship. So every effect has a cause, all right? If there is an effect, there must be a cause, all right? And this is for everything. So, in order to understand the effect of the world, because all objects are effectively an effect, all right? They're the outcome of something else. So we need to understand the cause of every effect. If we're going to start to explain what the world is a series of objects, including ourselves as an object that we discussed last week is anatma, all right? The world is a series of objects. These are effects. So what is the cause? Now, the Upanishads say that Brahman is the cause. Brahman is the name given to this one underlying reality that is the basis of everything. All right. And in order to understand that a little bit more, we've got to ask ourselves, what type of cause is Brahman? All right. Now, what type of causes are there? It is said that there are two types of causes. One is the intelligent cause, and one is the material cause. For an effect to be, there needs to be an intelligent cause, which is the intelligence with which it was made. And then there's a material cause, is the stuff with which it was made. So if you have a wooden table, which is the effect, its intelligent cause would be the carpenter, all right? And the material cause would be the wood. If you had a necklace, the intelligent cause would be the goldsmith, material cause would be gold, right? Do you see? There are two causes to everything. All right, so Vedanta always uses an example over and over again of the clay pot. Right? You must have heard this from other places. So, for a pot, which is the effect, what is the intelligent cause? The potter. And what is the material cause? Clay. Right? Simple. None of this, as I said, is very, very difficult. So, one of the things that we need to understand is that, first of all, that the clay, in this clay and pot example, the clay is permanent and the pot is impermanent. The clay existed before the pot took place. The clay was there while the pot was there in the world, and the clay will be there after the pot breaks. So the clay is permanent and the pot is impermanent. So the first thing we know, since the pot is the effect and clay is the cause, the first thing we come to understand is that the cause is permanent and the effect is impermanent, is transient. All right? So that's the first thing we know, that the cause is permanent and the effect is impermanent. Does that seem clear? Okay. Secondly, when we apply that to Brahman, we can say Brahman is permanent, because we're saying Brahman is the cause, and the world is impermanent. And we know that the world is impermanent. It comes and goes, right? This table will not last forever. There was a time when this table was not. Same with the room, the bricks, anything that you have around you, same with ourselves. There was a time when we were not, we're existing now, and there is a time when we will not be. Okay? Secondly, what we come to understand about effects is that the effects can be many. So I can have a pot here, another pot there, and a lamp, clay lamp over there, right? They can be many, and they can be displaced over different spaces. But wherever the pot is, there's clay. Wherever the cup is, there's clay. Wherever the lamp is, there's clay. All right. So we can certainly say that although the effects are in different places, the clay is everywhere. Using the analogy of clay and pot. Remember, analogies are only used in order to try and understand these things. So effectively, the clay is all-pervading because it is in every object. But every object is not all-pervading because it's in its own time and place. Right? Wherever the lamp is, the pot is not. Wherever the mug is, the lamp is not. But wherever the lamp is, there's clay. Wherever the pot is, there's clay. Wherever there's the mug, there is clay. So the cause is all-pervading and everywhere, but the effect is located in time and space. Equate that to Brahman. The cause is all-pervading and everywhere, but the effects, which are the objects in the world, find themselves in time and space. Okay? You need to understand these steps because they will build up and you get to a wow factor towards the end, and it's all derived from these all little mini steps. All right? That's why the understanding needs to come in these little levels. All right? Thirdly, the pot, lamp, jugs, plates, whatever, collectively the products, all right, are many, but the clay is one. All right? Apply that to Brahman. Brahman is one, but the objects of the world are many. So what have we got so far? We've got three. We've said that the clay, the cause and effect relationship, let's describe it. What was the first thing that we said about cause and effect? The first one is
material.
The cause, we've got two, first of all, we've got intelligent material cause. The cause and effect relationship says that the cause is permanent, the effect is impermanent. That's the first rule we came across. The second one is that the cause is all-pervading, but the effect is in its own time and space. Now we've done the third one, that cause is one and the effects are many. All right? Now we come to the fourth one. And the fourth one says, the clay has an existence of its own, but the pot cannot exist independent of the clay. clay can exist without the pot. The pot cannot exist without the clay. So the existence of the clay is independent, and the existence of the pot is dependent. Right? Imagine sitting down thousands of years ago and just looking at the world and coming up with these basic rules of logic. All right? So the very existence of the pot does not belong to the pot because it's dependent upon the clay. The pot borrows its existence from the clay, and it borrows it temporarily. It borrows it for the duration that it's a pot. The clay was there before. The clay is there in the pot. The clay will be after the pot is destroyed. All right. But the pot came to being. It existed in the world, and it will die. It will dissolve. All right. Therefore, it does not have an existence of its own. How can we prove it? How can you prove that when I have a pot in front of me, sure looks like a pot, I can drink out of it, it holds water or coffee or whatever, all right? It sure looks real to me, and you're saying that it does not have an existence of its own. It has a borrowed existence from the material, the cause with which it is made, all right? How can we prove it? Any idea? How can you prove that this pot that's standing in front of you does not exist? It's not substantial. The way you drop it and break it, it's got a transactional nature, right? It then dies. The pot effectively dies, just as you could have created it in the first place from a lump of clay. Now, the reason that you can prove that it is non-substantial, doesn't have an existence of its own, is because when something has an existence of its own, it is separable from anything else, right? If a pot had an existence of its own, I should be able to separate the pot and the clay. And they should both exist by themselves. I have a pot here and I have the clay there, all right? It doesn't work. And therefore, the pot is non-substantial, is a dependent reality, is dependent on the clay, all right? And in Sanskrit, this dependent reality is called mithya, right? It has no substance of its own. And we can say, I tell you what, you keep the pot, I'll keep the clay. It doesn't happen. What is the weight of the pot? Oh, it's 100 grams. What's the weight of the clay? 100 grams. What do you mean the pot has no weight? Right? What is the volume of the pot? The material with which it's made is the volume of the clay. I mean, it has no volume of its own. Yet we have a pot, this is a real pot in front of me, and I can drink out of it. And you're saying that it has no substance of its own. It borrows its existence from the clay. It has no weight, right? It has no mass, volume. Then what is it? It's a word. Pot is a word. It is a word that we've given to clay in a certain shape, in a certain form. So it's known as, it has a name, we give it pot, and it has a certain shape that we come to know as a pot. It is merely a non-substantial name and form. The underlying reality of it is the clay, the cause from which it came. That cause is called Satyam. Satyam. S-A-T-Y-A-M. So Satyam means, it has many meanings in Sanskrit, but in this case it means reality. That which exists in all three periods of time, the cause. And Mithya is the effect, that which is transient, that has no substance, right? Yet is transactional, yet is useful, and we can handle it. It's an object, but it's mithya, right? So, do these things, two things, become clear? It's a bit tricky. You never really normally look at the world in this way, all right? So, what we're seeing, therefore, because you think of the clay and the pot, the pot was, the cause of it was the clay. So from the clay came the pot. The pot then existed, and to the clay the pot will return. If you ground it up, mixed a bit of water in, it'll become clay again, all right? So apply that to Brahman as the ultimate cause that we're talking about. From that cause come these effects, right? These effects are then here because of the cause. The effects, remember, are merely names and words, names and forms of the underlying cause. And into Brahman, they will disappear, they will dissolve, just as the pot goes back into the clay. Right? Therefore, Brahman is considered, therefore, the original cause, the reason for its existence, and that into which it will ultimately dissolve back again. Right? Now, when we talk about cause and effect, we talk about the intelligent and the material cause. And so we have to now talk about, when we talk about intelligent cause, we use the word create. So the carpenter creates the table, the goldsmith creates the necklace. All right. When we talk about the material cause, we use the word become. So the wood becomes a table, the gold becomes a necklace. All right. Now, which type of cause is Brahman? Is Brahman the intelligent cause, or is it the material cause? Because normally we separate the two, just as we have a carpenter and wood, the goldsmith and gold. All right, we separate the causes to two different entities. But the Upanishads say that the intelligent and the material cause of the universe is one and the same, Brahman. How can that be? The example that it gives is a spider making its web. When a spider makes the web, it is both the intelligent cause of the web, and it also is the material cause of the web. Right? Again, it's an example, all right, in order to help us understand. So the general case is always that the intelligent and the material cause are two separate things. But there is an exception, and that exception is Brahman. Brahman is said to be both the intelligent and material cause. All right. So the Vedic teachings are saying, therefore, since Brahman is the intelligent and the material cause of all effects, and the cause permeates all effects. There is clay throughout all the pots in the world. Therefore, Brahman permeates through all the objects in the world. There is no such thing as object. It is merely a name and form. They say that Brahman is all there is. It manifests as all of these things. Now, therefore, the world is full of objects. And the objects are non-substantial, as we've said. They have an underlying reality. They depend on their cause. So we are sitting here as individuals. Do you want to base your life on objects that are non-substantial, which are just names and forms? Or do you want to base your life on things that are substantial, the underlying reality? When you base your life, when you become dependent as an individual, when you become dependent on non-substantial things, they will come and go. That's what effects do. All right. That will bring about the tribulations, trials and tribulations of life. That will bring in what Sanskrit calls samsara. All right, the ups and downs of life. Because you are depending on something that is not solid. All right? It is not a substance. We base it on other people, our situations, objects in the world. And invariably we fear that those objects, those situations, those people will go away, as they are bound to do. Because there was a time when they were not, they happen to be now. There will be a time when they are no more. All right. They are non-real, non-substantial names and forms. So therefore, dependence on non-substantial things can only bring you disappointment or frustration or sorrow or anger. What we currently describe as life. Because we're dependent on these non-substantial things, but rather when you depend on the substantial, it'll bring you freedom, right? And that in Sanskrit is known as moksha, all right? So all you're doing now is that you're trying to shift, what am I really dependent on? What do I consider to be the reality of life? All right. And I want to be attached to the thing that is most permanent rather than the thing that is most transient. All right. Now when you come to study this, all sorts of questions arise because language is a bit like that. Imagine the phrase, this person is a pillar of the organization, all right? Now, that doesn't mean that the organization has something round and solid and that is what the person is and he supports the organization by holding his hand up, all right? It doesn't mean that. It means that obviously he is the person that is most useful within that organization. All right, and therefore in the way that we use language, we must always be careful. If we say Brahman is the material cause of objects, we normally think of that the material cause of objects are also material. In the example of a wooden table, the table is the effect, the cause is wood. The wood is a material. But the Upanishads, the Vedic teachings say Brahman is not material. Right? It's consciousness. Therefore, there is a marked difference when talking about a material cause. We now actually mean that it is a formless, intangible, sentient cause. Never have that anywhere else, all right? When a material produces an effect, the material undergoes modification. When you change wood to a table, you have to modify the wood to become a table. Otherwise, it'll just stay as planks of wood. So the material normally undergoes a change, but Brahman does not. Again, a fundamental difference in our thinking. So because we have grown up thinking things affect and the cause, yeah, I can understand that. But then, the carpenter has to work away at the material in order to make a table. It's not like that with Brahman. Brahman does not experience any sort of change. So what we're talking about, something that is unchanging, intangible, formless, eternal, being the underlying reality of everything that is changed, non-eternal, non-substantial. Right? It turns the world completely on its head. I've grown up entirely thinking that this is substantial. All right, you have a piece of granite that is, as far as you're concerned, that's as close to eternal as you're going to get. All right, it's definitely solid. All right, it's tangible, it's material, and trying to think that that is made out of Brahman, which you're telling me is intangible, right, formless, sentient consciousness, becomes really difficult to believe. You see, that's why it is not part of our normal thinking. We don't get out of bed and thinking, oh yes, this table's made out of something that, well, you can't really see or touch and feel. It's not the way we normally think. But if you look at standard physics, physics will tell you that this table is 99.99999% space. All right. If you look at the other bit, it's made out of atoms, all right, molecules and atoms, then subatomic particles, and then you go down to quarks, and they sort of said, well, it's actually made out of energy. Is energy tangible? And ultimately they go to a point where they say, well, actually, this energy, we don't even know where it is. It's bouncing around. It just it has a probability of being where you look for it, all right? So they equate everything that's tangible in the world down to energy, which is intangible. So if they can do that with modern physics, it doesn't become that difficult to believe that all objects, all effects in the world has an underlying form, which is consciousness, all right? So there's some lessons to be drawn here. All right? If you have a question, if it seems improbable, by all means, we can discuss it further. We'll go at exactly the pace that we need to go at. All right? But it's a completely new way of thinking. All right? And that's why it has to be listened to intently so that you understand what is being said. And then you can do the analysis. And I hope that the notes that I provide you will allow you to go back and read it and do some analysis. So you can come back with some valid questions next week and say, I heard you, I read the notes, but this bit is still unclear to me. All right. That's the way that it'll work. So there's some lessons to be drawn here. So Brahman is the cause, material cause, and the world is the effect. Therefore, Brahman appears as the world. The clay appears as a pot. The clay appears as a mug. If the underlying reality is Brahman, then Brahman appears in the world. That means that I do not need to do anything special to experience Brahman. I don't need to go into a deep cave with a single candle and stay there for years, right, in my lotus position to say, I want to experience the underlying reality, Brahman. If you experience anything in the world, you're experiencing Brahman. If Brahman is all there is, then it was there before the experience, it was there, it's there during the experience, it'll be there after the experience fades away. If you experience a table, you're experiencing Brahman. If you experience a pot, you're experiencing Brahman. All right? If you're experiencing yourself, you are experiencing Brahman. Right? So Brahman is the cause and the world is the effect. Then the second thing we come to know is that there is no world other than Brahman. just as there is no pot, lamp, mug other than clay, there is no effect other than the cause. The cause pervades all the effects. There is no world of objects other than Brahman. Right? So there is no substance, other world other than Brahman. If the wood is the cause and wooden furniture is the effect, there is no substance called wardrobe, chair, table. There's only one substance, and that is wood. So what is the table? It's a non-substantial existence. It is a word. And remember, we called such a thing mithya. Okay? So, to recap, the cause and effect relationship is something that is very useful in understanding this thing. So cause is one, the effects are many. Okay? Cause pervades all the effects, yet the effects are in their finite and limited space. The cause exists in all periods of time, where the effect is subject to birth and death. Comes into being, exists, and goes away. All right? Finally, the difficult one, cause is independent, and the effect has a dependent existence, is dependent on the cause. All right? That's the cause and effect relationship. Now, we have to see how it applies to the world. So, if these are the four main features, we have to look around and say, what fulfills these conditions? That something is everywhere, something is eternal, something is one. All right? What fulfills these conditions? And if we look at any of the physical bodies or objects that we see, we say they aren't everywhere, they aren't eternal, and they aren't one. We can't seem to find Brahman in anything. Right? Any object that we know is transient. Right? From the tiniest little atom to a galaxy, everything is transient. But when we describe an object, we say, this is a house, this is a car, this is a pot, this is a table. What are we always saying in those sentences? And the word is. Whatever we find, all objects around us, the one thing that is common is that it exists. Right? Can you be describing something that doesn't exist? You can't appreciate something that doesn't exist. All right? So, the Upanishads say that the one thing that is everywhere, that is eternal, and that is one, is existence. That's the only common factor we can find in our world of objects. Right? So my change in perspective is no longer to look at the world as a series of disjointed objects, but change my attitude that it is a manifestation of a single underlying reality, the cause. And that cause is given the name Brahman. As long as my vision is pot-oriented, or table-oriented, or people-oriented, or situation-oriented, I will see mortality. Because that object, whether it be alive or not, that object will come into being and go away. Once I shift my vision away from the pot to the clay, right? Away from ocean into water, away from bangle into gold, when I shift my vision to the underlying cause, I shift from mortality to immortality in my vision, right? That vision of immortality is where freedom comes from. Because immortality points you towards an unlimited existence. It always exists. And the unlimited nature of it starts to eliminate the first problem that we have of thinking ourselves, the first ignorance that we have, that we are a tiny, limited, insignificant, limited self. It's just changing that vision from the individual objects, the effects, to going back to the cause. It's a cognitive change, right? Because we're so used to looking at a wooden table as a table, we give no thought to the wood. We don't see the wood for the table, right? And we do that for everything that's around us. Now, this is a very popular methodology, the cause and effect methodology. And it's a sort of softly, softly catchy monkey type thing, because he's trying to persuade you to think differently than you've done before. So it starts off very simple. All right, let's go through the methodology, because you'll understand how Vedanta treats it. So first of all, the first, there's a 4-stage methodology. The first two are additive, all right, and the last two negate. So first of all, you say, you present a wooden table and say, this is a table and it's an effect. It's an object in the world. This is a table, and everybody has to agree. This is a table, definitely a table. Yeah, I agree with that. Step one, we've created a table, all right? Next you say, well, the cause of this table is wood. Can't deny that either. So you've just introduced wood, and you say, the cause of this table is wood. Stage 3, it says, the table is a dependent reality. There is no substantial thing called table, because you cannot take the table away while I keep the wood. The table has no weight of its own, right? It is a word that we apply to wood that's in a certain form. I can chop up the table, if I was skillful enough, and make a chair out of it. Then where did the table go? Right? It's non-substantial. It's a word, it's a description, it's mithya. Right? Therefore, what is there is the underlying wood. There is no table. We use it for language purposes. There is only wood. Right? Now, see, it gave you the table. It gave you the concept of the wood as the cause. Now it's taken away the table. Right? And says, we're discussing a cause and effect relationship. I've just taken away the effect. Stage 3. All right? If I take away the effect, there is no cause and effect relationship. So you can't have a cause and effect relationship without a cause and effect. If I take away the effect, I actually remove the causal nature of the cause, because there is no effect that it is creating. All right? And then it says, therefore, there is no cause. All there is this underlying thing. There is nothing called creation, because the effect that you think is created is actually non-substantial. There just is a thinking about it. right? There is no destruction or dissolution, because what you're looking at is the effect is non-substantial, right? When a cause and effect relationship does not happen if one of the sides is missing. You take the effect away from a cause and effect relationship, all you have is the cause, and the cause by itself no longer has the causal status, because it doesn't cause anything to happen, because the effect has been negated. Do you see? Right? It's not easy, but it's the way the logic flows. You can't fault it. All right? So once the causal relationship has gone and there are no effects, and we say Brahman is the cause, the world is the effect, and we take the effective nature of objects away, then all you have is an underlying cause, which doesn't even have causal status. It is just Brahman. So there is no question, as I said, of creating anything. Right? It's just that Brahman, as if it appears as this table or chair or lump of granite. All right. Whereas I previously saw the effect, I now need to see the cause for what it is. All right. Why do we make this mistake? Why cannot we see the cause? Right? And much of it has to do with language. Because we come up with the idea that there's this cause, this material cause, the wood. I can make it into a table, a chair, a wardrobe. In order to transact with the world, I have to have these words, table, a chair, and a wardrobe. All right? And therefore, I made them into nouns. This is a table, this is a chair, this is a wardrobe. But when you think about language, all right, how do you describe different classes of the same noun? All right. So you could have a chair that's metal, plastic, or wood. And in order to describe it as a wooden chair, you use wooden as an adjective. You say, this is a wooden table, or this is a wooden chair. Wood is the adjective, chair, right, is the noun. It seems perfectly logical. If you say a tall man, tall is the adjective, man is the noun, all right? Basic English grammar, we all understand, all right? In the case of the tall man, what is substantive? The man. Tallness is a word that we use to describe the man because there's tall and short men, all right? In a wooden table, what is the substantive? The wood. What is the non-substantive? The table. So we've given the non-substantive table the status of a noun, and the substantive thing is the wood, we've made an adjective. All right? So we say wooden table, so we get very confused that normally the noun is the substantive thing, the thing that is really real, and the adjective just describes it because you can have the noun in many forms. All right? And so we hear wooden table, and it seems perfectly logical to us, as it is. Right? But we forget the wood is the substantive. The table has no existence of its own. It borrows it from the wood. All right. Ideally, we should be saying tabley wood or tabley wardrobe. That would be more correct. It would be more closer to tall man. But we don't. Now, we can't change the way we use language. But we have to appreciate and we have to understand what is being said, what is substantive, what is non-substantive. So effectively, to recap then, what is being said here is that there is one underlying cause for all effects. That underlying cause pervades all the effects. It is an unchanging, formless, sentient consciousness that is the cause for all changeable, solid, non-conscious objects that we see around us. This is really mind-blowing. It is literally mind-blowing because one of those objects is us. One of the objects in the world is ourselves. And the underlying cause of that is Brahman, that is unchanging. We have a world full of effects, full of objects, all right? They are tangible, they are transactional, they are useful, they're just not real. Any questions?
Okay, I think I must be extremely stupid, but where I get really confused is the table, the wood. The wood comes from the trees.
Yes.
The trees are a creation, and they're transient.
Yes.
And the same can be said
So,
with the clay. It comes from the soil, and that is a creation.
yeah.
And eventually it can disappear or merge with something else.
So, all right, because the wood table example is given as an example. It's not the real thing, otherwise we'd call it Brahman, all right? It is there in order for us to study. It's an analogy that we have to use. So if we say that the table comes from the wood, and you say, well, the wood is not really the cause, the wood is the effect. The cause is cellulose fibers that's making up the wood. All right, as you say, it comes from trees. You could put trees in between. The wood comes from trees, and well, the trees actually is an effect, is cellulose fibers. And those cellulose fibers are also not the cause, they're actually molecules. And the molecules are also an effect because the cause of the molecules are atoms. Right? The atoms are also an effect because the cause of the atoms are subatomic particles. And you go down and down and down, and it disappears just into a mass of what scientists would call just energy, all right? But then you have to think about it. Energy has also had an effect because we can measure it. So it must have an underlying cause. What Vedanta says is that that underlying cause, that itself does not have an underlying cause. The end of the line is Brahman. And when you take any material object, whether it's a wooden table, whether it's a stone vessel, anything, right? And you ultimately break it down. In scientific terms, we always break it down into atoms and subatomic particles. And what Vedanta says, it ultimately breaks down into Brahman. And each one builds its way up in order to become the final object. All right. Another example that's often given is cloth and shirt. All right. So the cloth is the cause, shirt is the effect. All right. Shirt is a dependent reality. You cannot have the shirt without the cloth. Cloth is an independent reality. You can have the cloth without the shirt. Do you see? But the cloth is an effect because it comes from yarn. Yarn is the effect because it comes from cotton strands. Cotton strands it goes down to Brahman. So eventually, the ultimate cause of everything is Brahman. What we see as effects in the world are a temporary manifestation of that as the object. Is that better?
Yeah, good, because that's a kind of way I was thinking, but
Yeah.
I couldn't quite
Yeah. Yeah, you can take all of these examples down and you say Brahman, that which the causeless cause is often how it's described. The causeless cause is Brahman. Because it is not an effect. It is the ultimate cause, but because the effects are non-substantial, it's not even the ultimate cause, it just is.
You just have to take the analogy further.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah,
Yeah, the analogy is taken further on everything that is described in order to get down to the level of Brahman. Any other questions? Easy? Difficult? Does it make the mind melt a little bit? Interesting? Have you heard it like this before?
Yeah.
Yes. Hearing it isn't the same as knowing it.
Yeah,
That
I know.
doesn't get to the-
I know. You have to do it a number of times. It's like, that's why it's called a practice. Yeah, you carry on practicing it until it becomes more and more and more clear in your mind, until you can start to repeat it back, until you can start to explain it to other people. And language is very important here. That's why you need to refer back to the original notes and things like this, because if you start to describe it in your own words to somebody and they say, oh yeah, I understand that, and they start to describe it, it becomes Chinese whispers, and before too long all sorts of inaccuracies come into play. That's why it's very important to always revert back to the words, because what we're trying to do is use language which is dualistic to describe something that is non-dual. It's a very difficult exercise.
Then we have to decide what we're going to do with this knowledge.
Yes, and what's the point of it all? And Vedanta says that the reason for this knowledge is to remove samsara, is to go from bondage to liberation. Once you know who you are the immortal ultimate self, all right, then all other fears disappear. Everything else is just role play. Today I got up and I was a mother or a father. Yesterday I got up and I was a son or a daughter, all right? Tomorrow I must go into work and I play the role of manager or employee or director or whatever. That's my role. That's what I need to do, all right? But I am playing a role. There's an underlying me that is different to the role. When the actor plays the beggar on stage so convincingly that the audience cries, he still knows he's not a beggar, but a very well-paid actor. All right.
What about the purpose?
The purpose of it is because what separates us from all other animals is our ability to analyze. The purpose of it, the reason that we are human beings, is to ultimately be able to understand who we really are. The purpose of it is the knowledge. Because only in this human form do we have the capacity to be able to understand who we are. So the purpose of being born is to truly understand.
And to help others understand.
And to help others understand.
But until you have the awareness, which is what this does, one cannot begin to understand.
Exactly. And the compassion that that brings, when you realize that that person over there behaving in that manner, right, is another manifestation of me, the underlying me, the higher self, not the lower self, the ego, the ahamkara, right, but my higher self is also the same within that person as within me. It brings a compassion to not only people, but objects and situations, right? You no longer fight that hard for a change because you are trying to exert your opinion over that of other people. Because the underlying reality is the same and it is immortal. What you're looking at is a transient effect that you're desperately trying to change. What you need to do is not change the world, but to change the way that you look at the world.
So it's just like you just exist.
You just exist.
Yeah, you just flow with what's going.
Yes.
Rather than.
Yes. And what you do is you exist with this mind and body capable of actions. And so what you do is utilize what you have to the very best advantage. So you do what needs to be done rather than what you want to do. Right? What you want to do is what your brain wants you to do. Right? That's not freedom. That's slavery to your brain. Freedom is being able to choose. I have this thing and I have this thing. Which one shall I do? That's freedom. Freedom is that which is open to abuse. It's the best definition of freedom I know. All right? And so how you live your life is to do the things that need to be done rather than what you want to do. And as you do that, you're slightly moving away from a materialistic world to a spiritual world. Materialistic thinking to spiritual thinking. Because you are now thinking about the greater good rather than the individual personal good, which is what I want to do normally is a gratification of a desire for my personal benefit, my personal profit. Whereas what needs to be done is the gratification of a desire that is good for others, with which I may benefit also. But the primary beneficiary are other things, other objects, plants, animals, the world, people, whatever it may be. It changes that perspective.
Motivation.
Changes your motivation. All right?
So do we stop reacting then? And start responding?
Yes, so you start, the difference between creation and reaction is only one word, one letter. So instead of reacting to things, and reaction is always applying one's opinion to what input is coming into you, you try to be much more creative in thinking that, if it's a situation, somebody is saying that to me, I fully disagree, and I'm now going to have an argument. Maybe more creative to say, I need to understand why they have that point of view.
That's the hard.
That's very hard. All right. So, but you now change from, what you want to do, which is have an argument, to what needs to be done, and you're making that shift.
I find that hard.
It is hard. But once you practice it, that's why all these things are called a practice. Once you practice it, you gradually find that what you naturally want to do becomes what needs to be done. All right? And then you get it. Suddenly you get it. Your life falls into place because there's none of this friction. Oh my God, I don't want to do that, so I'll do the good thing. But I know what needs to be done, but I'm going to do this because it's nicer. I know I need to call that person and sort this thing out, but I'd much rather not call. Because, and while you do that, while you have these two in your mind, you've got that friction, you've got samsara. You're living in, a life of misery because you've got that within your mind, playing within your mind, either forehead or back of your mind. And you're always making judgments. So the first thing, the first easiest step is not to make a judgment call. And that is so very hard to do. Because we've lived all of our lives, we've educated ourselves, got to this stage, right? We have opinions, and they're right. Correct? All our opinions are right. It's other people's opinions that are wrong. All right?
That's the ego.
Yeah, that's the ego coming back and saying, I know this is better, what you should be doing is...
Also, we're always continually, is it safe for us or not safe for us?
Yeah, so we always put ourselves, we preserve ourselves, whether to preserve our position, our status, our life, or whatever. We do things in order to preserve. Why? Because we think we're limited. Limited in terms of status, limited in terms of funds, limited in terms of lifespan. So all of our actions are designed to try and preserve ourselves. But once that vision disappears and it becomes a vision of immortality, now you can employ that energy to help others.
So when you look at how you get people looking at the mind, psychology, etc., how you look at the way the brain's made up and the stress response is that, like back to the safety thing, if that is underlying the way the brain works.
Yeah.
Can't think what the question's going to be.
It is much safer. I mean, they say it is much safer to assume that there's a tiger behind the bush. All right. There may only be a tiger behind the bush in 1 in 10 circumstances. Right? You could go along in life and say there is no tiger behind the bush, and in 1 in 10 cases you'll be eaten. But if you went around the world thinking there's a tiger behind the bush, I'm going to be ready with my gun, you'll never be eaten. And so we always go around with this fear that there's a tiger behind the bush. Right? We've brought ourselves up, and the more we have to lose, the more we fear. Right?
But is that, you read, it's only I've read about that, and I know that, about the fear factor.
Yeah.
But when you're born, this is mad when you don't even exist. When you're born, have you got that stress response in you? Is there no fear factor? Is it instilled by other people's?
It's instilled by other people. When you're born, unfortunately, you're dependent. So, the underlying thing there is keep life going. So a baby will cry when it's hungry, right? It's a response that will bring food to it. But it's an underlying thing. It's not a taught thing at that stage. It's more instinctive. Later on, we learn all the taught things. Lock your car before you set off. Lock the door before you leave the house. Things like this. Don't go near dogs that have got bits coming off their cheeks. So, we learn all of these things from experience, and we apply them. And that's where we are able to use our experience of the past in order to determine future action. All right. And we are very unusual as a creature in able to do that. That's why we have this thing called free will, which allows us to analyze our past and determine what the future action should be. All right. Very few things have free will. A cow doesn't suddenly go from vegetarian to non-vegetarian when he moves to America. It goes to fast food. It doesn't happen, all right? The cow carries on eating what it needs to eat. From the same soil, it is said that a lemon or an orange will pick what it needs to pick, right? For sweetness and for sourness. It's just that we have the ability, through free will, to be able to go into everything, and that's why we have the ability to destroy the world.
Do we get on to good and evil in this teaching?
Well, the thing is that no, there is no question of good and evil. There are actions that are beneficial to you, and actions that are non-beneficial. But ultimately, there is no good and evil. In fact, there are no words in Sanskrit for good and evil, which is quite interesting, because it's if something is immortal, all right, then I cannot actually do anything that's evil. I can do something while I'm in my current manifestation that will what appears to bring harm to other people, all right, but at the end of the day, we're sitting in a playpen and nothing's going to happen. We're quite safe within this thing. Even if we should die, that's not the end of us. That's the end of our body. Right? We will come back. That's a big leap. That's a big jump. All right?
This is telling me what
the time. That's right. That's limited. Yeah. Once you constantly believe that you're the limited self, you will behave in the limited self way. And what enlightenment is to look at the same world. Enlightened people aren't seeing this all in bright white light and golden rays everywhere. They see the world in exactly the same way as we see it, right? They just understand its true nature.
Cognitive.
It's a cognitive shift, right?
But massive.
It is a massive shift, but it's not a difficult shift to make, and it can be made in a moment, in an instant, all right? So there's hope for us all.
Well, they say, you know, when things are really bad, so someone's dying or going, we do get it. In that we can switch. It's just remaining when we've got it. That's the difficulty.
Yeah, practice and remember at a time of stress or trauma, we learn quicker. Why do we learn quicker? Because we realize at that moment that everything that we've come to know and to have and to be is not making one iota of difference to the outcome. All right? If it did, then you'd change the traumatic outcome. But it's not making one iota of a difference. And you start to say to yourself, perhaps everything that I know and have and am is not true.
It's a wake-up call.
It's a wake-up call. And then you can start to look, you know, if you are a footballer's wife, the world is fine. You can spend any amount of money, you look glamorous, and you can do whatever you like. You don't need to go and study Vedanta, the meaning of life. Life is very nice, thank you very much. So when life moves along like that, you have no care in the world of these things. Trauma brings it back home. When you realize that everything that you know and you have and can do makes not the iota of difference to improve your level of misery right now, then you say, I need to find something that brings me greater happiness. Because I clearly don't have it. Otherwise I'll be using it right now, because it's bloody traumatic where I am, and I'll prefer to be much happier than I currently am. And that's what leads you on the search, on the hunt.
It's very interesting, the difference between the East and West view of that, isn't it?
Yeah.
You know, why that's happened like that, why it's so different. Interesting.
Because the West is largely from a materialistic viewpoint.
All the same, but
Yeah. Yeah.
it's so different as well.
The sad part is that the East have taken on the Western logic, right? And they're all suffering intensely. Yet it's been written down thousands of years ago how to overcome it.
It's easier to set up a monastery which is going to have Westerners in it, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. It is. And, you know, all the influence of media and everything means that people of the East have largely forgotten. And if you take Advaita Vedanta to vast portion of, say, Indians, they look at you in a strange way. First of all, they say, oh, this is our culture, don't bring coals to Newcastle, we were born with this, and they weren't, all right? They've forgotten it, their parents have not taught them, all right? All they have is the Western view, and the Western view is like the tablet, it has an instant result, and it's very nice, thank you very much, but it has no long-term benefit.
That's right. Dalai Lama says that Tibetan people say the word Buddha every day,
Yeah.
but they've forgotten
Yeah,
what Buddha, they've got to go back.
yeah, to know what Buddha nature is.
Yeah, they
Yeah.
think forward is progression in it. It isn't.
No.
Does Sanskrit grammar teach nouns and adjectives?
It does have, yes, it does have that within it. Sanskrit is very good in the sense that also it's largely a phonetic language, so it can't be mispronounced. And if you read it, if you're a scholar and you read it, you can read a new word and you will actually pronounce it correctly. There's so many rules, though, that's the only thing. I mean, Panini grammar comes in with thousands of rules. It's a very complex language, but it's also a language where the word is made up of its function. So, for instance, we have some words in English, you'll say boom, as in an explosion, where the boom is describing what happens during an explosion, is the sound boom. So the Sanskrit is a bit like that. The Sanskrit describes its meaning, which is a very interesting way. It's a logical way for language to actually come about. And they're now saying that Sanskrit is not native to India. It came from the steppes of Russia and infiltrated down the northwestern corridor through what is now Afghanistan into northern India about 3,500 years ago.
Not from Greece, no, don't.
Not from Greece, no. In fact, a lot of Greek culture comes from the Vedic culture. So because there was a lot of toing and froing from the west coast of India. And there's in fact Greek accounts of ambassadors coming to India and seeing it all. And so all of the Greek mythological figures of Zeus and everybody is derived from an Indian equivalent. So Zeus is the equivalent of Indra in India, the demigod structure.
But they were the first people to really think of a common text.
They were, and but Sanskrit precedes that.
Does it?
Yeah. But yeah, we tend to think of Greek and Latin as, and it is the fundamental of all Western languages, but it's not fundamental of all languages.